our votes don't count. So I don't know. This place needs a bit of shaking up, in my opinion.
The ayes to the right, 111. The noes to the left, 364.
The ayes to the right were 111, the noes to the left 364. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! Division.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
OK, there we have it. Dame Caroline Noakes, she's the Deputy Speaker, announced the result there. Just briefly to remind viewers and listeners, 111 MPs supporting the Tory amendment, 364 against. Interesting that it's 10 fewer than the number of Tory MPs who are in the Parliament, and of course there are 5. There should be 5.
One assumes the 5 reform
are in there too. So we'll look at, some may have permission to be away, but your reaction to the political impact there of Labour MPs voting against a national inquiry into the child grooming scandal, Kwasi Kwarteng.
I mean, I know this is a technical issue in terms of votes in the House. I was surprised that they moved this as an amendment to a bill.
Yes, because a wrecking amendment.
Yeah, because there's no way that any government is going to approve or not try its hardest to vote down an amendment from the opposition.
I'm surprised because there now can't be a vote again on the same issue.
My understanding of parliamentary procedure is that they can't do anything on this. What would have been smarter, and what I think oppositions have done in the past, is an opposition day, where essentially there's a vote, and it's not a binding vote, but it's a vote, and MPs will be held to account in terms of how they vote for. And the most effective, forgive me, in my time in Parliament, some of the most effective opposition motions were opposition day debates.
An opposition day debate is what this should have been, because there you would have seen people peeling off, pressure put on. This was a wrecking amendment.
A blunderbuss, really, wasn't it?
Because what would have happened is the bill contained lots of safeguarding measures to protect children, to, for example, make children safer in children's homes. And so if the bill had fallen, the government had to pull all the stops to make sure the bill went through, because it's to protect children.
To save the bill. Well, but Lord the damage here to your former colleagues in the Labour Party, your former Labour MPs, is that they have voted, the Tories will say, against a national grooming inquiry. And is that damaging for your colleagues in the party?
I think there will be a big operation to explain to the public that there was never any possibility of a national inquiry based on this amendment, even if it had passed. That the bill had to pass because it contained safeguarding protections for children. And there will be another opportunity to do so. And I suspect if Labour brings forward an opportunity where they can vote for something, that will neuter it by the time the election comes around.
So typically, I was very surprised. I mean, I only found out today that this was the second reading would happen today. And I was very surprised that they sort of pegged the vote on this.
But they're using the pressure building bills up over the weekend.
There's no way. The government has to get its bill through. If the bill had fallen, that would have been a massive deal.
And a lot of this bill is based on
I know.
stuff from the last government.
I'm going to join me now is online grooming expert and former Met investigator John Taylor. John, welcome to Farage. What is your reaction right now? What is your reaction to MPs there not voting in favour of a national grooming scandal inquiry?
I feel, slightly. I feel for the survivors here, because that's where a lot of the pressure has been coming from, and certainly some government officials in some local councils, as we well know. But of course, when the vote was, nobody really expected the vote to go any different way. It wasn't a free vote; it was a whip vote. Straight away, that means they're going to vote for their parties, they're going to vote for their leaders, etc. But I think what people must understand is that what people are calling for, and includes some of my ex-colleagues, saying there should be a national inquiry. It allows far better understanding of the methodology, the typology of offenders, and of course the victimology. That's never really been discussed. If you look back at the recommendations from Baroness J, the fact is it goes through many recommendations, but doesn't actually discuss what everybody's been talking about. And then what we've got to understand is that we talk about people in public office. Well, this comes down from the top. You won't have detectives, you certainly won't have survivors who are, holding their tongue to say, well, this is what's happening, this is who's committing the offences, and this is how it's happening. What this happens, it feeds down from the top. So you've got senior officers who say, hang on a minute. You've got senior public officials within Crown Prosecution Service saying, we won't push this, we won't prosecute, we won't mention this because of. You don't get this at the ground level. So my immediate reaction is, one, I'm not surprised because it wasn't a free vote. Two, I feel sorry for the survivors. And three, yet again, what we all talk about, what the public are aware of, isn't actually being discussed. And I think that's a shame.
John Taylor, do you think that survivors, victims do want to have an investigation? The PM said today in the House of Commons that they are in a different place on this. There is no fixed view, he said. And he did meet with an unknown number of rape gang victims today, we are told by Downing Street. I should also note Kemi Baden has not met anyone involved in the scandal yet. Do you think that they do want to have an inquiry, or is the government right that maybe, let's get Baroness Jay's report, all 20 recommendations implemented?
Yeah, I think yes, they do, is the answer to your question, Christopher. The recommendations, this began in 2015. If you go through the recommendations, then what we know is there's going to be accountability, support, etc., and this thing called cultural change. What there has to be is some honesty here about, well, let's look at the grooming. Now, please, the grooming aspects of this, we're not talking about online grooming, we're talking about real grooming in real life within these cities. Why these young girls are being victims? Because they're vulnerable, they're coming from a vulnerable background, they're being deliberately targeted. You're actually looking at small organised crime groups here, because there's money involved, there's finance involved. It is the sexual abuse of these young girls, but there's money involved. And so if you imagine this organised crime group, well, that's what needs to be discussed. We've got to discuss that side of it.
Is the point about a national inquiry, public inquiry, that if it's judge-led, then the evidence is sworn on oath and no one can say you must attend and give evidence truthfully, and it can go anywhere? It can look at the role of the CPS, maybe even the DPP at the time, Sir Keir Starmer, senior police. Is that why it's different to what Baroness Jay has done?
Exactly, because they have to stand there on oath and say this is what was discussed. Because most investigations that would have carried out, there's going to be some sort of documentation. There's going to be people saying, this is the decision I've made. They might not have said it on pen and paper, why exactly, but that's what they need to discuss, exactly what has happened here. We're now talking, going up to 20 years of what all these investigators and these survivors have gone through. So that's why it needs to be a national inquiry. So people will say, and quite specific to the area of the actual offending of these individuals, who they are, why it's happening, who these organised crime groups are, rather than the great recommendations by Baroness Jay, but that's far more for the whole area of child sexual exploitation. Right. Mm-hmm. We need to discuss and find out what was actually happening with these cases of grooming within these cities.
And just finally, they feel let down, victims, in your view, from this. As I say, the PM says there's different views on this, no fixed view, he said. For me and Lord Russell Moyle, that did open the gateway, I think, to ordering some form of inquiry in the future. Do you think, though, that victims watching GB News tonight would be feeling deeply let down by the Labour Party and its MPs?
Yes, 100%. I've had the pleasure of meeting some victims over the time, and they want to be heard. They want people to be honest and say, well, why was this hidden? We know there's been failings. We know we can get support, they've told me, but come on, let's actually discuss it as it is. Let's be honest about what's happening within these cities to allow such awful abuse being taking place on these vulnerable children.
And why do you think there's been such a nervousness about this? Is it because of the issues of race, culture, community divisions, as Kwasi Kwarteng was saying earlier? Is that why? And the victims have been overlooked?
Yeah, Kwasi's quite right, and this comes from everything, from within politics regarding we don't want to lose certain votes from certain sections of society. We also don't want to be labelled. We don't want to be cancelled. We don't want to be called. And yet suddenly now it seems okay to say, oh, that means you're far right. No, it doesn't. We just want honesty. We want to know exactly what's happened to be able to make sure, because what this allows police officers and detectives to do in the future is to be able to go in and do an inquiry without fear of losing or being moved away from their position because of this.
Listen, John Taylor, online grooming expert and former Met investigator, thank you for joining us tonight on Farage on GB News. Now, joining me now is that man himself, the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, live from Westminster Hall. And Nigel Farage, why didn't other MPs agree with you and order this inquiry?
Oh, because Parliament is completely out of touch with the country. I promise you, this is the biggest conversation that is going on in family homes, in pubs, in clubs, all over the country. People are outraged, as we learn. And by the way, of course, Charlie Peters of GB News, who I mentioned in the House of Commons today, has done so much incredible work on this. We learned this was happening in at least 50 towns around the UK. But Labour are in total denial over the whole thing. And I mean, don't forget, it was a Labour MP that first blew the whistle on this, Anne Cryer, back in 2002, and they've been trying to bury it ever since. And the reason is that they cannot admit at any point that the multicultural experiment has had some serious problems.
And what happens next for you, Nigel Farage? You've promised by the end of the month, if there's no national inquiry ordered, you'll do one yourself. Is that still your plan?
Oh, absolutely, yes. If the government don't give in, if we don't get a proper inquiry into this, and goodness knows we do need one, then we will raise the money and we will appoint or find some sort of independent retired judges to run the thing. Yeah, no, we're not going to back off from this. The country deserves to know the truth about, firstly, the extent of what happened, and secondly, the extent of the cover-up and who was involved in that cover-up. We know already from stories, social services, police, but, does this go all the way up to the Crown Prosecution Service? Has Sir Keir Starmer got questions to answer? I don't know, is the truth of that. What were the motivations of those that committed these rapes? Were they actually racist motivations? Again, I'm not sure. That's what the inquiry has to be for.
And you said there you'd raise the money. Now, that draws the eye to Elon Musk, of course. Now, he's been tweeting a lot, dozens of times about this issue, hasn't he, from in America. He's been, in fact, messaging or telling people here to email their own MPs and tell them to vote for this Tory amendment today. And you're seeing on screen the Elon Musk amendment. Would he put the money up for a Reform UK independent inquiry into the child grooming scandal?
I have no idea. I haven't asked him about it. But if not him, I'm sure there are plenty of people that would, because we deserve to know the truth. But quick little funny story for you, though, Chris, before I go. The final bill, this new, child protection and education bill, we voted against, the five of us. There were two from Northern Ireland that voted against, and the Tories abstained. And because there were no tellers, our votes don't count. So, I don't know. This place needs a bit of shaking up, in my opinion.
You could have put some tellers forward.
I'm being told here by the former MPs this year, you could have put your own tellers forward, Nigel Farage.
Well, we didn't know the Conservatives are going to abstain. We've no idea. None of us have ever done telling before. I mean, no one tells you anything here.
Okay. No, it's true.
Well, you can only learn as you... Anyway, I tapped my vote, but apparently my vote doesn't count. So there we are.
No, he's right.
It's a big concern, though. I mean, how much money would you want to raise for your... Going back to the issue at hand here, how much money would you need to raise to get your inquiry going? And how would you ensure that it's taken seriously and isn't dismissed by the Labour government by saying, well, it's just Farage on his hobby horse there?
Well, here's the common thread that I've got. One of the reasons this got as bad as it did and went on as long as it did is that the girls that spoke out simply weren't believed. And I've got buckets of emails coming in from all around the country from victims and the families of victims saying nobody has ever properly heard their side of a story. I see no difficulty at all in getting victims and their families to come and speak about what happened. Obviously, we would not have the power of subpoena. Whether we get social services or not, do you know what? I reckon there'd be retired social services, retired police officers that would come and speak and would tell us the extent of the cover-up. We need to know the truth. Would it cost quite a lot of money? A reasonable sum of money. But you know what? This inquiry There's no reason why it can't be done and dusted within a year.
And just finally on this issue, have you met them? We know that the PM, Sir Keir Starmer, met earlier today with victims. Kevin Badenoch has not met any victims of this scandal. Have you met them?
I have in the past, yes, when I've been up in the north of England. And Kevin Badenoch, who, by the way, put the amendment down today, has not mentioned grooming gangs once in this House since 2017, despite for 2 years being the Women and Equalities Minister. You couldn't really make it up, could you?
Nigel Farage, thank you for joining us tonight from Westminster Hall.
Thank you.